Boothill is a character who really came out of the left field. On the day of March 12th, everyone had their expectations on the idea that Robin and Firefly would make their debut in 2.2. And though Robin's debut would be correct, the expectations would shift as the second character that would drop on March 13th was a character that no one would have ever seen before, unless they had been snooping around for a while. To some, it was very welcomed, and to others, Hello everyone, my name is Velen, and I'm a story lore enthusiast. And there's nothing I like more than a good story. And though Boothill was not what anyone was expecting 3 months ago, I welcomed it with open arms, because for those who may not know, well, I have a love for cyborg or robot characters. Heck, even my mascot, Akon here, is a cyborg. So I was actually looking forward to seeing just what kind of story they would cook up for such an individual. They certainly popped off with the design, so I hope they would do the same with his story. And well, you ask and you shall receive, because Hoyoverse did not disappoint. And today, I'm going to be discussing all of it. This is a Boothill character analysis. A life stood as a loaded gun. Boothill was first introduced during 2.1 when Constance was talking to Black Swan. Constance would refer Black Swan to the phone, where when she would pick it up, Boothill would be at the other end, mistaking her for Acheron. We get a strong impression of Boothill. Initially very threatening, but after Black Swan showed she was not his enemy, he was very easygoing and willing to assist her in answering her questions regarding Acheron. This would continue to stand true when we first meet him during 2.2, when Boothill hijacks the Express and Dong Hong is the only one present to confront him. Just like with Black Swan, he initially appeared to be seemingly hostile, but as soon as Dong Hong proves he's a real nameless, he takes his gun back and converses with Dong Hong very easily. Aside from these traits, he's also proven to be very knowledgeable and confident, showing no fear at the sight of danger. His strip marketing describes him as extremely optimistic and unrestrained, swearing to punish all that is wretched no matter the means. His main target is the IPC, claiming they are the target of his revenge. Boothill is considered to be morally dubious for his not-so-welcome means of wanting to get rid of the wretched. He has caused enough trouble to get the IPC to plan a bounty on his head. But despite this, Boothill still seems to be a pretty reasonable person, especially in the present. So, what exactly is up with Boothill? What led him down this dubious path? Well, to understand a person's present, you must understand their past. So, let's get right into it, shall we? Now, I always try to abbreviate the character stories and background. However, for a big part of this, I'm gonna be reading it almost word for word, bar for bar, because the narration for this character story was just absolutely incredible, and I think it deserves to be acknowledged more, so strap in. An important warning: the following contains discussions on the topics of colonization, genocide, child death, suicide, and very graphic descriptions. These topics are discussed for informative purposes only. It was a snowy day, and out and about was a cowboy by the name of Nick and a cowgirl by the name of Gray. It's unsure what these cowboys were really doing, but regardless, the two would stop in their tracks as Nick notices something in the snow. As Nick approaches, he calls Gray over, and laying there in the snow crying on his own would be young Boothill. Though back then, he went by a different name. They never really tell us directly what his name was, however they described it as a strikingly beautiful name, and mentioned that in the ancient language of the planet known as, I'm not going to pronounce that, his name meant loaded gun. Gray would pick up the red-faced child and would take him with them. Honestly, it was a miracle that Nick and Gray went out to the snow and found him that day, or else little Boothill would have died of hypothermia. which by the description of him being red-faced implies that he was already at the beginning stages of it, since getting red flushed skin is a consequence of having high blood pressure, one of the things that the body does to generate heat for oneself. So Boothill was a rather lucky kid. He would be raised under the protection of Gray and Nick. He was very loved by the two and had many other siblings who, much like him, were also adopted by them. They all came from different places, but now they all played together on this planet. Gray taught him all about plants, animals, and rivers, while Nick taught him how to tame horses and farm sheep. At a young age, he rode his colt, a male baby horse, across the streams following Nick as they led their cattle to the beautiful fields under the morning sun. Nick would always sing loudly as the sun would shine out. When little Boothill would hear him sing, he too would begin to sing a song of his own. As he made his little baby horse speed up, their laughter would spread further and further on into the distance. Day after day, Nick and Gray would continue to raise them, and as time went on, they too would begin to grow old. Ever since Boothill became a cowboy, he had experienced many aspects of life. He had mastered every skill there was to hunting. He charged through sandy wastelands fighting bandits, making deals with merchants and battling for places to survive with the beasts of the wilderness. He had narrowly escaped death, tasted the flavor of taking revenge on a rival gang, and seen many friends lose their lives in the flight of a bullet, and seen families fall apart in mere moments. He lost so much, so many, and yet gained lots as well. In the end, his courage earned him status and respect. He would rarely see his siblings anymore, but he knew that they were living well. On a silent night, he stared at the sky and thought about the greater world outside. Evening would then come, and Boothill would suddenly hear the sound of cries. Following the sound, he discovered a red-faced baby that would not stop crying. He had no idea what to do, but eventually he would do the same as Gray did to him, and picked up the little baby girl in his arms and brought her home. The sound of Nick's gruff voice resounded in his ears as it said, "The water here is smooth as fine wine. The cold snow is cutting like a knife. This place is the perfect world." A shadow cast by a spaceship covered the moonlight across the plains. Boothill had just returned to his base with his bounty. He looked up to the uninvited guests above. They were well-dressed people in black, and they were walking out from the deck of the spaceship, being escorted by armed guards and onto the cowboys' land. Boothill had taken something that the person called a synesthesia beacon. The beacon emitted some strange visions that would end up flooding his mind. These visions showed him the endless shining worlds outside the plains, forests, and tracks that he was familiar with. Meanwhile, giant excavators appeared on the horizon of the plains. Beneath the ground, there were tons of ore that they wanted to take. They completely disregarded the protests from the locals. The heavily armed guards blasphemed against the locals' beliefs, cast them out of their homes, and insulted their honor with little to no compensation. Boothill and his partners turned to guerrilla warfare to fight up the advances of the people in black. However, the cowboys' schemes, marksmanship, and swift mounts all seemed laughable when compared to the might of the IPC. Members of his family died one after the other, which made him realize that unless he found the person who started all of this, he would never be able to bring this to an end. He stole a worker's uniform and snuck aboard the spaceship in the middle of the night. Thanks to his instincts and sharp senses he gained over the years of hunting, he silently took down every guard that stood in his way and cleared every checkpoint and interrogation to reach the core cabin. A remarkable feat. He would see the figure of a man who seemed to be saying something to his subordinates. Aragon contains crucial strategic resources. He who claims it first will take great advantage in the departmental competition. As these savages and uncivilized cowboys are unwilling to cooperate with the marketing development department, we have no choice but to assume administration of this world. We are running out of time. You are permitted to use military force and bring civilization to this world. A terrifying thought rushed into his mind. He frantically ran out. Around him, the employees remained joking and laughing. He held his breath and stifled his rage and tears. His family still needed him. He couldn't just stop there. Cannon fire rained down from the heavens. By the time he stumbled back, the farm, the elderly Gray and Nick, as well as the friends he had grown up with, they had all lost their lives to the sea of flames, all reduced to ashes. He held a faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he would be able to find that tiny figure. She had only learned to walk a while ago, and would gently slap at the little wooden guitar he had made for her and giggle. But there was nothing. The land was scorched and black. He didn't even have time to make a gravestone for the ones he had lost. The International Peace Corporation, the marketing department. This empty sight and these names ran through his mind like a nightmare that edged into his core. Even if he were to die and be born again, he would never forget this. And from here on out, the trajectory of his life would take a new direction. All the while, what did the IPC do about the incident? Oh, what was that? They just swept it under the rug? How unsurprising! According to the planetary records of the planet, the locals who farmed and roamed the lands for generations were, and I quote, wiped out by an unknown disaster. Wow, real creative there. The survivors, mostly composed of the elderly and youth, only shelter in small reservations that just seem to continue to get smaller and smaller over time. And the real kicker is that even now in the present day, the black ore is used in massive quantities as a rare metal to create destructive weaponry, and it is shipped out to more planets on fleets of the IPC transport ships. Oh, it just gets my blood boiling, and perhaps to a few upon reading this story, these events may feel a bit familiar. Well, that might be because Boothill's background shares a lot of parallels to reality. So, allow me to fill you in on a bit of history. Boothill in the story is a skilled cowboy, and though nowadays cowboys tend to be associated with white Americans, the truth of the matter is that the cowboy we are familiar with today originated from indigenous Mexicans. They were originally simply known as vaqueros, a word that is derived from the Spanish word vaca, which means cow. They were renowned for their ability to easily adapt skills such as the lasso, which was one of the many ways for people to identify them apart from normal horse riders. These cowboys would then go on to teach other natives in the area. Though the current vaquero was originally from indigenous Mexicans, there were also many cowboys who came from diverse backgrounds, such as Native Americans, African Americans, Eastern US folk, and Spanish. And here's where we get to the familiar part. As you may not know, these indigenous folk would be colonized and exploited for their territories. They were harassed and attacked by paramilitary groups as they worked on their land. And why did they want their land? Profit. And what happened? They attempted to retaliate. And how did that end? Well, they would die. Slowly but surely. Because upon wanting to defend themselves and their land, they would cause uproars and fights, and ultimately, many would die amidst these. There were also those who died by illness and malnourishment, all mostly at the fault of the colonizers, because they took away their homes and everything they had. It's clear that Boothill's background is highly inspired and based on the history of indigenous culture, This is a common theme for Hoyoverse. They are always taking inspiration from real cultures or events for their stories or regions. Like how the Xianzhou is inspired by Chinese culture, Adventuring's background and home planet being highly inspired by Romani culture, and even Genshin having their regions and lore taking inspiration from real countries. For Boothill, they use indigenous and native backgrounds, not only in his story but also with the little details like the feather in his hat. The eagle feather, which is held in very high regard by indigenous folk. Even nowadays, there is law where individuals, certifiable people of Native American ancestry, enrolled in a federal recognizable tribe are legally automatic to obtain eagle feathers. The law is called the Eagle Feather Law, and it exists so Native Americans can continue their traditional, spiritual, and cultural practices. The feather represents honor, power, strength, and freedom, since eagles are considered the strongest and bravest of all birds, something that Boothill also very much embodies character-wise. Knowing that Boothill's background comes from a very real place made his entire story hit that much harder as a Hispanic person myself. So basically, much like the colonizers, the IPC is basically also full of shit, and Boothill is prepared to do whatever he can to get closer to the IPC, even willing to throw away something that any sane person would never dare sacrifice. And that something was his body. It's not clearly stated, but it seems that at some point, Boothill came to the conclusion that he was going to have to do something in order to garner enough strength to go on par with the IPC. The IPC is very advanced, and all their members are heavily geared. Meanwhile, Boothill, well, he was just a normal human by comparison. His hunting skills just weren't gonna cut it. It wasn't enough. To take down a whole leader that is part of probably the biggest faction in the universe, something else needed to be done. And CharacterStory 3 explains in depth how he was going to achieve this. The character story begins with, and I quote, a short doctor. The doctor tells Boothill that this robe does not suit him and that he should find a job or get an education. He did not say anything in response. He just took off his clothes, revealing skin completely covered in scars. But the doctor didn't stop pestering. A young man like you deserves a better future. This road, on the other hand, belongs to those who have no other choice, for people who can't start again but still want to make evil pay. His response was to press a gun to the doctor's forehead, or as they put it, the part that could still be regarded as a forehead. Boothill would then go on to say that if he wanted a lecture, he would have gotten himself an education already. The doctor just brushes him off, telling him that guns don't work on her, and just told him to lie down. The lights above the operation table lit up. He felt as if he had fallen into a deep sea. His flesh was wrapped up and then melted into everything around him. His body departed, leaving only him and his hollow thoughts struggling all alone. Something of note that I decided to research upon is that usually during a procedure of amputation, the body part is incinerated post the operation, since it's considered a biohazard. Though the patient does have the right in some places to keep the removed amputated part. However, in this case, it was done during the procedure, where he was still much conscious, which is pretty disturbing to think about in its own right. The emotions of terror, anxiety, loneliness, darkness, and rage, these things didn't dissipate with his physical body, rather they remained in a different manner, and they were heavier than before. He could smell the scent of something being charred, and he even felt the doctor's soft breathing. The whirl of machinery buzzed around his ears, and the new blood refused to flow towards his thirsty heart. He really wanted to just fall asleep like this and never wake up again. until he heard those crude songs and those gentle words, and memories of yore surfaced once again. The unforgettable hatred turned into a weak light in the darkness, and he followed it to walk toward the end of it all, exerting every ounce of his strength to rise once again to the surface. "Congrats, you're pretty hard to kill." "You thought I was gonna die?" he responded. She states that most people would have died, and that wouldn't be because she was bad at her job. Remember that. We'll be elaborating on that statement later. "Well, I got a piece of news for you. I've been dead for a long time." She doesn't say anything in response to what he said, and instead, she asks for his name. He briefly pauses. The gently crude voices had disappeared. No one will ever call him by that crisp and resonating name ever again. "Boothill. Where I come from, that's what we call gunmen who were killed." He smiled, revealing his mouth, now full of sharp teeth, and quoted, "But this is just the beginning, Doc. This is the smallest price I have to pay out of the grand cost to get my revenge." So he would cast aside his old, beautiful name and embrace himself with a new name, Boothill. Quite depressingly fascinating how he went from a name that meant loaded gun to a name like Boothill. The story was very adamant about only telling us the meaning of his name, but not what the name itself was. So I figured the term loaded gun could have some symbolism. And upon searching, while I didn't find any symbolism at first, I decided to search what does loaded gun represent, and my first option I found was an analysis and summary on a poem by the name of "My Life Had Stood, a Loaded Gun." A poem by a name some Robin fans might recognize, Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson wrote the poem "Hope is the Thing Within Feathers," which Hoyoverse paid direct tribute to with Robin's song that goes by the same name. They also have referenced Emily in things like their live stream, directly quoting her. Overall, the people of Hoyoverse are a big fan of her, clearly, so coming across this information was certainly not a coincidence. The poem itself, like most poems, can have multiple significances, so I had my friend, who was more informed about literature than I could ever be, to find any potential connections that this poem may have to the character of Boothill. And well, to no one's surprise, there is. I'll be reading the poem that isn't in Old English, because I still have more to read, alright? I don't need these tongue twisters at this moment. But I will put it on screen for the people who do want to read it themselves. My life felt like it was a loaded gun, unused and set aside in a corner, until one day the gun's owner came in, noticed me there, and took me away. Now we wander outside in the woods together, hunting a female deer. When the gun is shot, it feels like the owner and I are one, and I'm acting out his wishes. The gunshot echoes through the mountains. I smile during these instances, and the light from my smile glows upon the valley like a volcanic eruption glows with lava. When it's night, when our day is over, I protect and watch over my master. This duty is more fulfilling than sleeping beside him and sharing a pillow. I'm dangerous to his enemies because I kill them on the first try. I aim. They look into the barrel of the gun, and a certain thumb pulls the trigger. I might live longer than the owner, but he actually has to outlive me, because I can only kill. I don't have the power to die. Okay, so what does this poem mean, and how does it tie to Boothill? Well, according to most analysis I could find on the poem, and that my friend could read, and helped water down for me, the loaded gun is the speaker, the one talking in the poem, while the owner seems to be a metaphor for the person's rage. They make the speaker and the speaker's rage embody two characters. The poem explores the control the rage has over the body, while simultaneously, the rage gives the speaker the ability to make the speaker feel powerful and express themselves. They tend to be carried away with their anger, but through that anger, they garner strength and will. The speaker introduces her life as a loaded gun, detailing a powerless and meaningless existence before the arrival of their owner. The rage, by the 14th line, they're no longer referred to as the owner, but rather their master, solidifying her devotion to her rage, protecting it and tending to it, because it's the only thing she has. This poem parallels a lot with Boothill's rage and hatred. When the hatred turned into a light that led him through the darkness and gave him motivation to wake up again, it is much like the poem where the owner suddenly appears and takes them away. And much like the speaker who ends up devoting themselves to their rage, so does Boothill, with it being his sole only driving force. Because outside of Boothill's revenge, Boothill has nothing else. Boothill, now referring to himself as, well, Boothill, seems to serve as a personal reminder, because his revenge is about avenging those whose lives were taken prematurely, not wholeheartedly about himself. He's simply using his rage as a weapon and himself as the means to enact personal justice on behalf of the fallen. I will elaborate a bit more on this as we go further, but for now, let's take a look at what happens next. While Boothill drags himself out the door in his new body, the doctor wishes him good luck as he leaves. Boothill couldn't help but look above at the night sky outside. Another star had been ignited in the sea of stars above. A beautiful symbolic touch there, by the way. The new star being ignited because Boothill's motivation has now rekindled. Living his life with a new motive and a new name. In essence, if the passing away of his loved ones was the day he died, then this was the day of his rebirth. Now, something that I noticed about these character stories was how not only did this segment just tell us about the process about Boothill's upbringing, but also demonstrates a bit on how Boothill is in front of others versus how he is with himself. Boothill just seems to put up such a brave face all the time. In the main story, he's either silly, over the top, calm, or confident. He's just so fearless and willing, and for the most part, in these stories, he's like that too. But then we get to see that true burst of vulnerability. It was close to happening when Boothill heard the order for the attack in the IPC, but he held it back. But when the surgery began, it was like at that moment, all those emotions simply surged out and overwhelmed him all at once. And then, poof, when he would wake up, he would talk again to the doctor as if normal. The bitter irony of her stating most would die in his position, and Boothill just seemingly brushes it off as if he didn't just sentences earlier for a moment yearn that he could just die in the middle of it all. The doctor is obviously right, by the way. It's clear that most people once in his place would die, whether it be of pain mentally or literally. Not everyone has the will to see through such a gruesome procedure like this. It's just way too excruciating and honestly, extremely traumatizing too. So giving up just sounds so much easier, and so they just die in the middle of it. This is a very real thing too. The human mind is very powerful. There are many that somehow survive almost impossible events merely because their will was so strong that somehow they managed to persevere. Boothill in the end persevered, but it took much strength to overcome it. Fortunately though, he wouldn't have to go through with it ever again. Is what I wish I could say, but the unfortunate truth is that this pain would seem to become a depressing cycle. as we will get to see with the description of the light cone sailing towards a second life. The beginning of this brings a very strong sense of déjà vu. He felt as if he had fallen into a deep sea. However, the rest, though sounding familiar, would have some starking differences, with this time using everything was departing from him, leaving only his hollow thoughts, writhing and struggling all alone. Writhing itself means to respond with emotional or physical discomfort to a violent or unpleasant feeling or thought, sort of emphasizing how much worse it was this time around than the last. A familiar paragraph then continues. Terror, anxiety, loneliness, darkness, and rage. These feelings didn't dissipate with his physical body, but this time remained within the mechanical shell in a different manner, and it was heavier than before. This entire description, just out of the gate, feels far more darker and heavier and eerie compared to the first time. This time, he did not hear the gentle voices or the crude songs. Instead, they were replaced with cruel memories. He couldn't even sense the doctor's breathing. In fact, he never, quote, said anything. Because unlike before, it wasn't just him and his hollow thoughts. It was just his hollow thoughts left alone there. The blue blood did not reject him either, but one thing did stay the same, and that was the unforgettable hatred turning into a weak light in the darkness, and once again he followed it, exerting every ounce of his strength to rise once again. He opened his eyes, and a flash of a firework darted past before hearing the doctor's congratulations. Welcome to this world once again. He balled his hands into a fists that were now made of cold iron. He would no longer live for himself. This time, there was no toughing it out in front of anyone. It was just straight up just reading and witnessing Boothill relive the most twisted parts of the procedure, and it just leaves a very bitter feeling. This felt far less hopeful, probably due to the fact that this time it was purely the unforgettable hatred that brought him back, unlike before where the hatred was fueled by those past memories. Because this time, it was already there. After all, this is not his first experience. All it could really do was guide him once more. It's even more barely ironic that in Boothill's character details, he is defined as extremely optimistic. And when you first read this description of him without knowing anything else about him, this choice of wording would never come across as odd at all. But in retrospect, this way of describing him just feels a bit misleading. To be extremely optimistic implies that they believe in an unrealistic degree of optimism, which for Boothill, it couldn't be farther off from the truth. Boothill has many grounded moments during the main story. There's even a moment when Boothill is talking to Dang Hong on the topic of paths and eons, where he delves into a pessimism mentality. Boothill is someone who tries to remain optimistic. He is willing to believe in people's good intentions while simultaneously tries to be grounded, believing that these good intentions, regardless, must be earned. His mentality is just a grounded balance between pessimism and optimism when it's truly needed. But perhaps to an outsider like the IPC who does not know what drives him, Boothill may be perceived as someone unreasonable, someone who expresses so much excitement when tearing down their troops. In their eyes, he's probably straight up a lunatic. In fact, when talking to Geed in the All About Boothill event, she describes him as someone positively diabolical, which is a very bold way of defining him. Even though his optimism and the things that drive him forward all come from a place of hatred, This hatred is directed to the IPC and those with ties to them through and through. He does not generalize his hatred. The fact that Boothill can control the direction of his hatred and doesn't generalize it is just even more telling about how kind Boothill is at his core. With all these emotions and the background he harbors, you kind of think he would be straight up a villain, because these kinds of tales can and tend to be used for an origin story of a villain. But Boothill, despite everything, is better than that. After all, he still has his lines as a Galaxy Ranger that he could never cross. The never bully the weak and vulnerable, and the never kill the innocent. Though Boothill's journey for revenge has left him in some interesting territory, walking a thin line between good and bad. So let's get into that, shall we? What has Boothill done over time that has led him now, at present, to have a 750 million credit bounty on his head? So let's take it back to Character Story 4, where Boothill's investigation began. Boothill would return many times to Aragon to investigate who was the one behind the order of the annihilation of his whole tribe. However, he came to discover that the man's identity had been erased from historical records. This would drive Boothill to force his way into the Garden of Recollection branch and try to read memory bubbles related to his home planet. He would knock over all of the precious and rare memories of the garden, and so the memo keepers had no time to stop him. He would eventually get kicked out, but amidst all the chaos, in one of the memory bubbles, he managed to catch a glimpse of the man, Oswaldo Schneider, the head of the marketing development department in the IPC. You may not be familiar with this name, but no worries, allow me. Oswaldo was an ex-nameless who would then go on to join the IPC, and he had a hand in the establishment of the Sigonian sovereignty, one that is mentioned during 2.1 in Adventuring's POV, and that would eventually lead to the Abdin-Katakan extinction event. After this discovery, Boothill would go on to commit attacks against the IPC's fleets in Pierpoint's interstellar port, ruining a lot of business for the MDD. Yes, you go Boothill, beat their ass. In that moment, Boothill had 5 charges of assault against Pierpoint, 3 counts of attack against weapon warehouses belonging to the MDD, multiple counts of attack against IPC workers at the rank of P40 or above, and he also had charges of theft, riots, creating an explosion, and many other incidents on planets under the IPC's jurisdiction. Boothill was obviously annoyed about all this because, well, the reports made it sound like he was some kind of amateur, which I suppose in their eyes he really was, compared to like the other criminals that are wanted by the IPC and that they have dealt with. Not to say that he wasn't a threat though. He still was, and even more so now. Boothill is an absolute menace, but we will get to that. Since Boothill can't track Oswaldo by normal means, cause the Muddle Fudger is a hard person to find, even among his own ranks, he decided to try and track them by sniffing out the employees who harbored resentments against Oswaldo, which he says he can identify. And so that wraps out the more crucial parts of Character Story 4. Now then, how many of you guys actually read the All About Boothill event? Yeah, because I certainly did. Even though this event was certainly the event of all time. But the good thing about it is that not only did we get to learn about Boothill's crimes and overall negative, we also get to see some of the good stuff he has done too. and we get to expand a bit more on who Boothill is as a person, which will be pretty important for when we delve into his philosophy. So let's start with talking about the bad, and then delve into the good, okay? Rapid fire, 3, 2, 1, go. Boothill has cases of abduction, arson by burning down a warehouse and causing a forest fire, vandalizing of vehicles, blowing up beast traps, just straight up causing chaos, theft against a store in Pierpoint, contaminating water because during combat he chucked used bullet castings into the water. He also got accused of kidnapping. However, the reason they were putting up this case was because they wanted to find more information to then declare a charge. So, for now, it's just an accusation. And for whatever it's worth, it was hosted by a masked fool, so I don't know. Take that as you will. Now, I just briefly resumed that, but just by that alone, you know that Boothill is quite the menace. He does all this just to make the IPC's life more difficult, just taunting them. And by taunting them, he feels that he can get closer to them. All of the places Boothill targeted were all places who were deeply associated with the IPC, like the Intelligentsia Guild, the Garden of Recollection, Pierpoint, and even Herta Space Station. So keep his crimes in the back of your mind as we now go on to the more positive contributions. Punklore reported that Boothill's story inspired them to make an adventure game with him as the main character. Some armed archaeologists were attacked by monsters but were saved by Boothill. However, he did cause a bit of trouble because one of the bullets blew up against the archaeologists. How does that even happen? During battle, Boothill saved one of the Talia's wounded soldiers, but his treatment methods were extremely crude, leaving after effects. He used a phosphorus tracer to stop a human's wound from bleeding. It's the thought that counts, I guess, alright? Boothill apparently, unexpectedly, performed something during an outdoor live stream, and the entertainment division of the IPC, who was in charge of it, wanted to have future collaborations with Boothill, because due to his presence in the stream, it got instant massive success. I swear, these are so freaking random. Boothill encountered the exoplanet trekking tour from the LaFu, and he led them to an undiscovered new route, which they wanted to make public. And finally, Emerald 3 was looking for someone connected to Boothill that can present a certificate to him. Boothill had done a donation to the migrant charity. The person who wanders with no home donated to the charity that gives migrants a home. That is just so bittersweet. I can't with this guy. According to Doris, the chairperson of the Emerald 3's charity, Boothill claimed he couldn't read and refused to sign it. Though she saw through it as an excuse, she didn't have the heart to expose it. Which, by the way, this is indeed an excuse on behalf of Boothill. He is indeed capable of reading. He reads the Trailblazers text, he could read the written news report in CharacterStory 4, and he could read Black Swan's note during 2.2. What is in fact true is that he cannot write, which is why he sends voice messages to the Trailblazer instead of text, so he is partially illiterate, which is not particularly uncommon. He didn't go to school. Most parents teach their children to read over writing, since reading is considered a more essential skill as a whole, especially taking into consideration their fields where they could go on and do their jobs freely, because lacking the ability to write wouldn't really affect them overall. Basically, we don't know why Boothill did not want to take the certificate with him. But the case in point is that there's a very interesting contrast that can be seen between the reports. With the exception of the live stream that was not intentionally done, Boothill went out of his way to help these people. His heart is in the right place, but the means are concerning at best, and he is very, very aware of it. He is told that he feels like a man that carries out justice, and he states in his response that by the estimate of most, he doesn't really count as a good seed. He gives us a bit of an example. If he runs into someone he doesn't like, he will definitely rob them blind. But if he runs into someone in need of credits, he will just hand the money to them. If you reckon that's justice, then I guess it is. Dong Hong's notes on the matter states that at first, Boothill's statement sounds absurd, but that there is sense to it, and Dong Hong is right about that. If they are a shitty person and he robs them and gives it to someone in need, that is indeed a type of justice. The concept of justice as a whole is very complicated with much nuance. Boothill himself doesn't really care very much about how others perceive him and his methods. This is a path he willingly chose, and it's not one that he will ever step back from. In his eyes, this is something he must do. He goes out and helps who he can and will tear down those he believes are wretched and have wronged others. He'd rather leave the philosophical debate to the pure-hearted. He'd rather approach his goals without too specific restrictive moral principles. After all, they could get in the way of punishment and can even lead to one's own downfall. Even so, he does agree that there should always be a bottom line that should never be crossed when on the hunt, which is, again, never bully the weak and never kill the innocent. He also has some more personal ones that he elaborates on in the voice line chat principles.
Might be that my pockets are filled with ill-gotten gains, but I stick to my principles. Rule 1. Never use dirty money for pleasure. Rule 2. Credit ain't the same as cash. And Rule 3. A bit of fun don't count as indulgence. I never break these rules.
This is all fair game. After all, at the end of the day, unlike the poem, where the speaker uses their anger as a means to feel powerful or in control, Boothill's revenge isn't about gaining satisfaction or power over anyone. It isn't even about him. It's about those he lost and lives that still had much time left that were cut short. Boothill has to at least try and have a bit of a good time in the process, because other than that, there is little enjoyment for him to feel. He already gave away a human's most precious thing, their own body, a part of what makes us human, something which he also holds dearly as his E6 shows him in his purest form. The E6 is always meant to feel intimate. It's a person at their most vulnerable state, and in Boothill's case is a reflection of his humanity. Despite him on the surface being 90% metal, Boothill is still very human, and he tries to hold close to that humanity, even if he's slowly losing grasp on it. With each upgrade, a bit of his humanity is lost, but Boothill will never cast aside the inner feelings that make him feel alive and human, despite how overwhelmingly painful they are. Because despite everything, it's what drives him. Once his family is avenged, there will be nothing else waiting for him, except perhaps the sweet scent of eternal rest. And with that, the standoff is soon to come to an end. But one thing is clear, As we progress through the story and delve closer to the IPC, Boothill will return to be relevant, and perhaps even gain a spotlight. 2.2 itself finalized with Boothill confronting Aventurine, another person who harbors a distaste for Oswaldo. And with 2.3 coming around, we can hopefully see how their interactions will transpire. I really look forward to seeing how they'll use Boothill's story in the future and how they will conclude it. Boothill won over my heart, not only with his charismatic character and unique design, but also for his emotional story that truly left me absolutely devastated and shocked. Listen, okay, I never expect Hoyoverse to give any character a happy backstory, alright? I know better than that. But this one just caught me way off guard. And it was way more tragic and darker than I could have ever imagined. Hopefully we will meet the space cowboy again soon. I'm gonna miss him. Alright, everyone's gonna be moving on to Firefly and all the other characters, and I'm gonna be mentally still stuck in Boothill. Thank you for being my top favorite character, Boothill. And thank you for sticking around to the end. I could go on talking about how incredible of a character he is, but I need to shut up now. Anyways, what do you think about Boothill? Did you learn more about him after listening? Feel free to share all your thoughts below. I like reading comments. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to stick around. I got more analysis underway. And if not, then thanks for stopping by. May we meet again, somewhere in the universe. See you next time. Bye!